Imagine a country where all healthcare and education are completely equal and free. A world where the government provides a significant portion of monthly necessities, like food and personal care products for free. A world where there is no discrimination between rich and poor, where people earn roughly the same wages and young people don't worry about their future. This is what Cuba is like. Let's take an imaginary journey to Cuba. This Latin American country located in the Caribbean, about 150 kilometers south of the US in the Atlantic Ocean, consists of over 4,000 small islands and archipelagos, with an area of 109,084 square kilometers. It's the 15th largest island in the world, and the biggest in the Caribbean. Havana is both the country's capital and its largest city, although it's often seen from the outside as a peaceful, vibrant, and joyful place filled with dancing people. For over half a century, it has been fighting against the embargo imposed by the United States. While the world continuously develops and modernizes, Cuba remains the same. It's as if it's stuck in a time loop, as if it belongs to a different era. Because of the US embargo, which has isolated it from the global economy, time in Cuba seems to have stopped in the 1960s, yet life moves very fast. According to research by UNESCO, this unique situation has made the country one of the most desired places to visit in the world. People want to see this magical old world atmosphere before it changes. This small island nation, with 62 years of revolutionary history, possesses a hidden power that allows it to stand up to the superpower America. Before I describe the interesting and unique way of life here, I need to briefly tell you about its history so you can understand the reasons behind things. First, Cuba is one of the few socialist countries with a one-party regime governed by the Communist Party. The island was first declared Spanish territory in 1492 by Christopher Columbus and remained a Spanish colony for almost 4 centuries. Later it became a U.S. colony. Cuba only gained its independence in 1902, but couldn't escape U.S. influence. In fact, in 1933, the U.S. installed Batista in power through a coup. American companies controlled 2/3 of Cuba's farmland and most of its mineral resources. Cuba was a source of raw materials and a market that fueled the American economy, and the American mafia had a say in everything. At that time, Cuba was one of the fastest growing economies in the world, largely because of the U.S. prohibition in 1919, which caused Americans to flock to the island. With casinos, nightclubs, brothels, and hotels run by the American mafia, along with drug trafficking, the distribution of wealth became extremely unequal. In the words of the impoverished Cuban people, who were used as pawns by the U.S., Cuba was the country of sins for Americans. For Fidel Castro, a revolution was inevitable. The revolution, which began with Che Guevara in 1953, ended in 1959 with the overthrow of the dictator Batista. The revolution completely changed the country's destiny. In a single night, all private businesses, homes, cars, everything were nationalized. The people were content, because all the wealth left behind by the Americans was distributed equally among the public. With support from the Soviet Union, free healthcare, education, housing, and food aid were provided to the public. Before the revolution, only 10% of the population was literate. In 1961, the government temporarily closed all schools, sending 100,000 teachers and students to rural areas to teach people to read and write. Today, Cuba has one of the highest literacy rates in the world, at 99.8%. To ensure everyone could own a home, half of the tenants were made homeowners. A year later, new houses were built and rented out for a price that would not exceed 10% of people's income. As years passed, everyone was provided with a home. Foreigners were forbidden from owning land in Cuba, while surplus land from owners with more than 402 hectares was nationalized and distributed to 200,000 landless peasants. During this time, the U.S. tried to sideline and weaken Cuba with military operations and economic embargoes, causing hundreds of thousands of Cubans to flee the revolution. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, aid to Cuba stopped and things began to change. The country instantly lost 80% of its foreign trade. The economy shrank by 60% at the same pace. The food ration to people was halved, so much so that Cubans lost an average of 30% of their body weight. Food shortages began. For instance, bakeries started making bread from sweet potatoes because they had no flour. Electricity was cut for 4 hours every day, but social services were never charged. For many years, the country's economy was based solely on tobacco and sugar production, with sugar accounting for 80% of exports. However, Tourism was now seen as the only way to revive the economy, and in 1993, Cuba opened its doors to foreign nationals for the first time. In fact, tourism was never planned. All the hotels were initially built for Cubans. The embargo that started with the revolution still continues today. Because of the US, Cuba is a country shunned by almost the entire world. The US has imposed conditions on all countries stating, "Do not trade with Cuba. You cannot sell our goods to Cuba. If you trade with Cuba, you cannot trade with us. If your ship goes to Cuba, it cannot come to us for 6 months." Looking at the country's demographics, the Cuban people have a culture blended with Spanish, African, and indigenous traditions. The total population is about 11.5 million. According to official data, 63% are white, 27% are mixed race, 9% are black, and 1% are of Asian descent. The country has no official religion. In fact, after the revolution, it began to be referred to as an atheist country. The most common belief is Catholicism, brought to the island by the Spanish. Then there's Santeria, a religion that emerged in Cuba from African traditions. As for daily life, the country has partially recovered from shortages and a lack of opportunities, and it continues to live on its own terms. People earn an average of $30–40 a month. There are no huge differences between people's salaries. Whether you're a doctor or a waiter, you earn roughly the same. I gave the example of a doctor because doctors are one of the highest paid professions in the country, earning around $50. In Cuba, every neighborhood is a suburb. Class distinction is non-existent. People aren't struggling to survive, but they naturally feel a desire for more when they see what tourists have. The ration system provides people with basic food items like meat, milk, flour, rice, and eggs, as well as personal care items like shampoo, soap, and deodorant, every month. However, this aid only covers 40% of people's basic needs. Frankly, in this country, people work for the state, and in turn, the state provides for them to a certain extent. There are no homeless people on the streets. 90% of the population owns their homes, while those who don't live in state-provided housing. But don't imagine brand new, luxurious homes. Almost all homes in the country are 30–40 years old, as are their furnishings. Homes lack technological appliances like washing machines, dishwashers, microwaves, and air conditioners. The state also covers utility bills like electricity and water up to a certain limit. Because there is no significant income inequality in the country, people are, in a way, content with their lives. However, the situation has started to change slightly in recent years. Since 2017, the state has allowed for a private sector. To prevent income inequality, a countrywide income tax was implemented for the first time since 1967. Today, nearly 20% of the country consists of the private sector. But when I say private sector, don't think of factories. These businesses are usually places like cafes and restaurants, and even if they are private, they are under state control. Contrary to popular belief, people here enjoy working. They live by planning how much they will spend each month. Everyone has to do something in addition to their state salary to make a living. A large part of the country's land is dedicated to tobacco. A large portion of the population works in tobacco in their homes and gardens. Before the private sector was allowed, people would illegally sell products like ice cream and newspapers on the streets after work. Given the situation, some people have chosen an easy way to make money, just like in any other country. Since taxi drivers earn more than doctors, many people with cars have started working as illegal taxis, earning in a single day, or even just a few hours, what a doctor can earn in a month. When these situations arose, the government tightened control. It's a crime to carry a foreigner in your car. In any case, locals can't afford taxis, only tourists can. For transportation, the public generally uses buses, which are almost free. Engineers, mechanics, journalists, and many others have given up their professions to work in tourism-related jobs. Until 2011, it was forbidden for Cubans to buy and sell private homes. Also, since 2011, the state has allowed people to operate their homes as guest houses or restaurants. Rooms in these guest houses, called casa particulares, are rented for between 25–50 euros a day. With this being the case, and with people being able to earn money this way, everyone in the country has become a tourism professional. By the way, those who visit the country say that the Cuban people are very warm and hospitable. Until 2012, it was forbidden for Cubans to travel abroad. Today, it's not forbidden, but people don't have the money for it. Since they can't travel abroad, they cannot fully compare their country with others. By the way, Cuba does not grant citizenship to foreigners, not even through marriage, unless they were born on its soil. Cubans who go abroad must return to their country at least once every 2 years to avoid losing their citizenship. ATMs are not common in the country, and credit cards are not accepted in most places. The country's currency as of 2021 is the Cuban peso, and $1 equals 24 Cuban pesos. I said, as of 2021, because for more than 20 years, two different currencies were used in the country. It was planned for the country to fully transition to the Cuban peso by June 2020. Up to that point, the currencies were as follows: the Cuban peso used by the Cuban public and the convertible peso, CUC, used by tourists. One convertible Cuban peso was equal to 25 Cuban pesos. For example, pesos were used on buses, while convertible pesos were used in taxis, restaurants, and hotels, which the public couldn't afford. Because of the currency used by tourists, the country is actually as expensive as some European countries, as €1 is almost equal to one convertible peso. Cuba is as socialist toward its citizens as it is capitalist toward foreigners. It is able to remain socialist thanks to the economy driven by tourism. The country's official language is Spanish, and very few people speak English. Almost everyone in the country is literate, but there are no books, magazines, or newspapers for people to read and gain knowledge from. There is no press freedom in the country. Television, radio, and newspapers are all state monopolies. They are not as informed about the world as we are. The internet is both limited and very slow. In a world where we increasingly stare down at our smartphones, this is a place where people still walk with their heads held high. Until 2008, it was illegal for people to own computers and cell phones. Until 2013, only tourists staying in hotels could access the internet. Mobile internet also became available in the country in 2019. However, considering that 4 GB of internet costs $30, which is the equivalent of an average Cuban's monthly salary, internet access is a luxury. The use of internet in homes and workplaces was legalized just last year. So how could people afford a phone with such an economy? Many Cubans have a relative living in America as a result of past immigration, and thanks to this, they can get a phone without saving for years. For some Cubans, the most important source of income is these relatives living abroad, who can also send them money if they are lucky. Walking the streets of the country, you won't see any billboards or familiar restaurants and cafes that you would find in any other country. Everything in the country is unique to the country itself. Due to the embargo, there are still food shortages in the country. There are no supermarkets like the ones we're used to, where you can find everything. Most of the time, the shelves of the markets are either empty or consist of a single type of product. Because there is no industrialization in the country, almost everything, down to cookies, is imported. Also, since prices are determined by the state specifically for the public, tourists are not allowed to shop everywhere. Shopping malls, which have become markets all over the world today, were first opened in the country in 2015. Since these malls are not affordable for the public, they are, of course, for tourists. Another thing for tourists is hotels. The public is forbidden from staying in hotels for leisure, and their economy can't afford it anyway. Although foreigners are now allowed to make hotel investments in the country, 51% of the hotels are state-owned. It is mandatory for Cubans to be in management, and most of the employees are Cuban. The employees' salaries are paid by the state. One of the biggest problems for the public is that the state is a partner in everything. For example, if you are a farmer and want to eat a chicken or a cow, you have to get permission because the state owns the animals. One of the things that comes to mind when you think of Cuba is cigars. This is the country where the highest quality cigars in the world are made. So much so that the US president at the time bought cigars from the country before imposing an economic embargo on Cuba. Cuba is a very safe country compared to many others, especially in South America. Since surveillance is strict and rules are harsh, crime rates are very low. The story of the classic cars in the country is as follows. Most of these cars are American cars, and their original owners were Americans who left all their property behind when the revolution began. Since the US prevented American cars from entering the country after the embargo, and Cuba couldn't produce cars, the people have been using the same cars ever since. It wasn't until after 1970 that new cars from the Soviet Union began to arrive in the country. However, these cars were distributed to workers and doctors by the state. Until tourism opened up in 1993, these cars were not very valuable because they were old and consumed a lot of gas. However, with the start of tourism and the fact that it was illegal to import and export these cars, they suddenly became valuable. Selling these cars is forbidden. They are a legacy passed down from father to son. The country has the best healthcare system relative to its income. The reason for its success in this area is that the country, unable to import medicines due to the embargo, had to start producing its own medicines. Cuba sends doctors to some Latin American countries, especially Venezuela, to get the oil and other products it needs. The state invests a lot in training a doctor, since it believes that a doctor who goes abroad would not return because they could earn more. Doctors are forbidden from going abroad without permission. The diseases the country has been most successful in treating are cancer and HIV. They developed a vaccine that slows and stops lung cancer, turning it into a chronic disease. In 2015, Cuba became the first country in history to eliminate mother-to-child transmission of HIV and syphilis. Cuba, a pioneer in health tourism, was the first country to eliminate polio and measles. Today, many diseases are no longer seen in the country. In 1985, the country developed the first and only vaccine against meningitis. The success of all these doctors has gained such a reputation in the world that the U.S. Agency for International Development has put a cash reward for information about Cuban doctors. It's truly tragicomic that the U.S., which has an embargo on the country, is trying to poach Cuban doctors with high salaries. The country has one of the lowest birth rates in the Western Hemisphere. 3 generations usually live in the same house, passed down as an inheritance, because it's too difficult for the government to build new homes and give them to its people. Therefore, because families cannot provide a house for every child, they usually have only one child, or choose not to have children at all. The state sees every child born as its own, and prenatal education and child care are mandatory for expectant mothers. After the child is born, there is no concept of a private school, as all educational institutions are state-owned, free, and equal. The state provides all of students' needs, down to their pens. Additionally, theaters and concerts are free, as music and art are considered a right of the people. While more tourists are good for the economy, it has also caused growing discontent among the public. Seeing the luxurious lives of tourists, the Cuban people have started to question communism, even if only a little. Some believe that the country might transition toward capitalism in the future, while they cannot live the life they want in their own country. Tourists are living out their dreams right in front of them, dreams that might seem simple to most people, like riding in classic cars, staying in hotels, or having dinner out. The older generation, who remember life before the revolution, is very attached to the current system. Fidel Castro is a leader who won applause for his anti-US stance, but was condemned by human rights advocates for his autocratic rule. While Fidel Castro is the country's national hero, there are no monuments or places named after him. As per his will, it's forbidden in the country to name streets, parks, or buildings after him, or to erect statues of him. By the way, Fidel Castro is the person who has faced the most assassination attempts, surviving 638 of them and earning a place in the Guinness Book of World Records. Although Cubans respect all leaders worldwide who have fought against imperialism, there is only one statue of a foreign leader in the country. It's of Ataturk, and not just one but 2. The only other statue of a foreign national belongs to another Turk, Nazım Hikmet. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. We will explore the world together, so don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss my new videos. See you in the next video.